Jack Carter's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he pulled into the driveway of his first home, a modest, single-story house in a quiet suburb. The driveway was cracked in places, and the paint on the shutters had started to peel, but to Jack, it was perfect. After years of grinding through double shifts as an auto mechanic and living in cramped apartments, this house represented something he'd long dreamed of: independence. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a foundation for a future he was finally ready to build. As he stepped out of his truck, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the small yard. His sister Lily was waiting for him on the porch, a bright smile on her face. At 20, she was still figuring out her own path and had temporarily moved in with Jack while her college campus underwent renovations. She had promised it would only be a couple of months, but Jack didn't mind. He liked having her around. It made the house feel less empty, and he took pride in being someone she could rely on. "You sure this is the right house?" Lily teased as Jack approached, her eyes scanning the property with mock skepticism. "Looks like it hasn't been touched since the 80s. Jack smirked and tossed her a set of keys. "It's not much now, but wait until I get my hands on it. A little elbow grease, and it'll shine." The two spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the house. Jack pointed out all the things he wanted to fix: the squeaky floorboards in the hallway, the outdated kitchen cabinets, the loose railing on the porch. But the backyard was what truly stole the show. Though overgrown and bordered by a weathered wooden fence, the space was expansive. Jack envisioned summer barbecues, a fire pit for chilly nights, and maybe even a garden where Lily could plant the flowers she always talked about. "Wow," Lily said, standing near the center of the yard and spinning slowly. "This place has potential." Jack grinned. "Exactly. It's going to be our little sanctuary. No landlords, no shared walls, no rules we don't make ourselves." That last part stuck with him more than he realized. Jack had spent years frustrated by petty restrictions in apartments: no loud music after 10, no modifications to the space, no pets over 30 pounds. Here in this house, he thought he was finally free to live life on his own terms. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Jack spent his evenings scrubbing grime from the walls, repairing broken fixtures, and trimming the hedges out front. Lily pitched in where she could, painting the living room a soft gray and organizing the kitchen. Neighbors occasionally stopped by to introduce themselves, bringing casseroles or baked goods as a welcome gesture. Most were friendly enough, though a few seemed overly curious about Jack's plans for the property. "So, have you met the HOA yet?" one older neighbor, a woman named Nancy, asked as she handed over a plate of brownies. Jack raised an eyebrow. "HOA?" Nancy's smile faltered slightly. "Homeowners Association. They're involved in a lot around here. Rules about lawn maintenance, parking, that sort of thing. You'll get a letter from them soon enough." Jack nodded politely, but internally he brushed it off. He'd heard about HOAs before: strict, bureaucratic organizations that like to control every aspect of a neighborhood, but he didn't see how they could be much of a problem. After all, this was his property now. What could they possibly dictate? A week later, Jack's first official correspondence from the HOA arrived. It was a generic welcome letter, outlining a few basic rules and inviting him to attend the next monthly meeting. He skimmed the paper quickly before tossing it onto the kitchen counter. "What's it say?" Lily asked, glancing up from her laptop. "Nothing major," Jack replied. "Just some stuff about keeping the yard clean and not parking on the street overnight. Nothing I can't handle." "Good," Lily said with a grin, "because I'm planning on making this yard the ultimate hammock zone." Jack laughed, feeling a sense of ease. The house was coming together, his sister seemed happy, and life was finally starting to feel stable. He didn't think twice about the HOA's involvement. In his mind, they were a distant and harmless entity. But things began to shift subtly as the days went on. One morning, Jack noticed a flyer taped to his mailbox. It wasn't unusual for the neighborhood to get community notices, but this one stood out. It was bright yellow, with bold letters that read, "Improvements coming soon." Curious, Jack peeled it off and brought it inside. "What's that?" Lily asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Some HOA thing," Jack said, unfolding the paper. It described an initiative to enhance shared spaces in the neighborhood. Words like community enrichment and modern upgrades were peppered throughout, but there were no specifics about what these improvements would entail. Jack frowned. Weird. It doesn't say what they're actually doing. Lily shrugged. Maybe it's new benches or something. They love that stuff. Jack chuckled and tossed the flyer into the trash. He didn't think much of it, at least, not until the trucks arrived. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Jack returned from work to find a group of men unloading equipment in his driveway. They were hauling large crates and lengths of pipe toward the backyard. His pulse quickened as he pulled the truck into park and got out. "Hey," Jack called, striding toward the workers. "What's going on here?" One of the men, wearing a reflective vest and holding a clipboard, turned to him with a smile. "You're Mr. Carter, right? We're here to install the community hot tub." Jack froze, his mind racing. "What? In my backyard?" The man nodded. "Yep. Everything's been approved. We'll be done in a few days." Jack's stomach churned. This wasn't just unexpected, it felt like an invasion. He glanced over at Lily, who had stepped out onto the porch, her expression mirroring his confusion. "Who approved this?" Jack demanded. "The HOA," the man replied casually, turning back to his crew. Jack stood there, dumbfounded, as the workers continued their task. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This was only the beginning. Jack stood frozen in his driveway, his eyes locked on the men unloading massive crates labeled Hydrotherm Spa. The sound of drills and hammers echoed across the neighborhood as they began assembling something in his backyard. Jack's heart pounded, disbelief coursing through him. How could this be happening? This was his home, his property, and yet strangers were trampling through it like they owned the place. "Hey," Jack barked, walking toward the crew. His voice was sharp enough to stop a few of the workers in their tracks. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" A man with a clipboard and a reflective vest stepped forward, his expression calm and annoyingly unbothered. "We're installing the hot tub," he said, as if that explained everything. Jack's brow furrowed. "What hot tub? Who sent you here?" The man glanced at his clipboard. "The HOA approved it. Community Enrichment Project, all planned and permitted. Didn't you get the notice?" Jack felt his blood start to boil. "Notice? No, I didn't get a damn thing about this. Who gave you permission to set this up in my backyard?" The man shrugged. "I just do the installs, sir. All the paperwork is handled by the HOA. You'll have to take it up with them if you've got concerns." He turned and walked away, shouting instructions to his crew, as if Jack wasn't standing there, fuming. Jack clenched his fists, staring at the chaos unfolding on his property. He stormed inside, slamming the door behind him. Lily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, but she looked up with wide eyes when she saw his expression. "Uh-oh," she said. "What happened?" Jack pointed toward the backyard. "They're putting a hot tub back there." Lily blinked, confused. "What? Why?" "Apparently the HOA approved it," Jack snapped, pacing the room. "They didn't ask me, didn't even tell me. They just showed up and started working like this is their property." Lily stood and walked to the window, peeking out at the construction. "That's insane," she said. "Can they even do that?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "I don't know. But I'm going to find out." He grabbed his phone and dialed the number for the HOA listed in the welcome packet he'd received. The line rang a few times before a chipper voice answered. "Good afternoon, Fairview HOA office. This is Trish speaking. How can I help you? Yeah, this is Jack Carter. I live on Pinewood Lane, Jack said, barely able to keep his frustration in check. There are workers installing a hot tub in my backyard right now, and I'd like to know what the hell is going on. Oh yes, Trish said, her tone annoyingly cheerful. That's part of our new community enrichment initiative. Didn't you receive the flyer we sent out? Jack gritted his teeth. I got a flyer, but it didn't say anything about putting a hot tub on my property. Well, the board approved the installation a few weeks ago, Trish said smoothly. The location was chosen based on accessibility and aesthetics. It's a great addition to the neighborhood. Jack's jaw tightened. It's my backyard. Don't you think I should have had a say in this? Trish's tone remained unfazed. As a member of the HOA, you agreed to comply with community improvement projects. It's all outlined in the bylaws. Jack felt like he'd been punched in the gut. I didn't agree to this. I didn't even know it was happening. I'm sorry you feel that way, Trish said, though she didn't sound sorry at all. But everything was handled according to procedure. If you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next HOA meeting. Jack hung up without saying another word. His hands were shaking as he set the phone down on the counter. Unbelievable, he muttered. What did they say? Lily asked. They're acting like it's no big deal, Jack said, his voice tight with anger. Like they have every right to do whatever they want. Lily frowned. There's got to be a way to stop it, right? You can't just let them get away with this. Jack nodded, his resolve hardening. Damn right I won't. The next few days were a blur of noise and frustration. The workers came and went, assembling the hot tub with what seemed like deliberate arrogance. Jack tried to talk to them again, but they just pointed him back to the HOA. Meanwhile, neighbors started stopping by, curious about the construction. Some were enthusiastic, talking about how great it would be to have a hot tub in the neighborhood. Others, like Nancy, seemed hesitant. I didn't realize they were putting it on your property, Nancy said one evening, standing at the edge of Jack's driveway. That seems intrusive. You think? Jack said bitterly. By the end of the week, the hot tub was complete. It sat in the center of Jack's backyard like an uninvited guest, gleaming under the sun. A small sign had been installed next to it, reading, "For community use only." Jack stared at the sign, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. That evening, as the sun set, he made a decision. If the HOA was going to treat his backyard like public property, then he'd use the damn hot tub himself. He grabbed a towel and headed outside, lowering himself into the steaming water. For a brief moment, the heat melted away his frustration, and he almost felt relaxed. The moment didn't last long. The next morning, Jack found an envelope taped to his front door. It was from the HOA. Inside was a formal letter informing him that he had violated the rules by misusing community property and that he would be fined $200 for his actions. Jack stared at the letter, his hands trembling with rage. He crumpled it into a ball and threw it onto the counter. This is war, he muttered under his breath. Lily looked up from her coffee, alarmed. What now? They fined me, Jack said, his voice dripping with disbelief. For using the hot tub. The one they put in my yard. Lily's eyes widened. They're serious, aren't they? Jack nodded. Oh, they're serious, but so am I. He grabbed his phone and started dialing numbers. First his lawyer, then local authorities, and finally a few of the neighbors he'd spoken to during the construction. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were about to get one. Jack sat at the kitchen table, the HOA's letter crumpled beside his coffee mug. He had read it twice, and the words still burned. Fined for misusing community property? In his own backyard? The absurdity of it made his head spin. Across from him, Lily scrolled through her phone, shaking her head. "This can't be legal," she said, her tone half disbelief, half anger. "Oh, it's legal," Jack muttered, his jaw tight. "They've got their bylaws and procedures to back them up. They think that makes them untouchable." "Then what's the plan?" Lily asked, leaning forward. "The plan," Jack said, his voice firm, "is to fight back. I'm not letting them walk all over me like this." He spent the morning calling every number he could think of. First, he contacted his lawyer, Paige Donovan, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had helped him close on the house. When he explained the situation, she let out a low whistle. "They put a hot tub in your backyard without asking, and then fined you for using it," Paige repeated, her tone incredulous. "Exactly," Jack said. "Can they even do that?" "Well, it depends," Paige replied. HOAs have a lot of leeway, especially if their bylaws include clauses about easements or shared property. But it sounds like they're pushing boundaries here. Let me take a look at the documents you have. Send me the letter, the welcome packet, anything else they've given you. "Will do," Jack said, his resolve hardening. After sending Paige the documents, Jack decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear his head. As he strolled past other homes, he couldn't help but notice how many of his neighbors seemed to avoid eye contact. Some gave him polite waves, but others looked away quickly, as if they didn't want to get involved. When he reached the corner of the street, an older man in a faded baseball cap called out to him. "Hey, you're the guy on Pinewood, right? With the hot tub." Jack turned, his brow furrowed. "Yeah, that's me." The man chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "Name's Tyler. I live down the block. He got into my own mess with the HOA a couple years back. They fined me for having the wrong kind of mailbox. Can you believe that? A mailbox." Jack crossed his arms. "And you just went along with it?" Tyler's grin faded. "I tried to fight it. Got hit with more fines. They even threatened to put a lien on my house. HOA doesn't like it when you push back. You'd better be ready for them to come at you hard." Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. "Thanks for the warning." Over the next few days, the HOA's pressure intensified. Jack received 2 more letters, each one colder and more threatening than the last. One accused him of disrupting community harmony by hosting unauthorized gatherings in the hot tub. Another informed him that he would be responsible for any maintenance costs associated with the hot tub, citing unapproved usage as the cause for potential wear and tear. Jack's frustration boiled over when he came home one evening to find his trash cans overturned and garbage strewn across his driveway. At first, he thought it was raccoons, but then he noticed the timing. It was too coincidental. He felt his pulse quicken as he scanned the street, but no one was in sight. "Coincidence or not," Jack said to Lily later that night, "I'm setting up cameras. I want proof if someone's messing with me." He ordered a set of security cameras online and spent the next afternoon installing them around the property. The cameras were discreet but effective, covering the backyard, driveway, and front porch. Meanwhile, Paige had been digging into the HOA's bylaws and found a few things that raised red flags. "First of all," she said during a phone call, "there's no clear precedent for them installing community property on private land without explicit consent. The language in their bylaws is vague, but that works in our favor. It makes their actions look arbitrary." "So what's the next step?" Jack asked. "I've filed a formal complaint to freeze any further HOA action against you until this gets resolved. But be ready for them to push back. These organizations hate being challenged." Jack didn't have to wait long to see Paige's prediction come true. 2 days later, he found another letter in his mailbox, this one accusing him of vandalizing the hot tub. Enclosed was a photo of a small scratch on the side of the tub, which the HOA claimed would cost $500 to repair. Jack laughed bitterly as he showed the letter to Lily. "This is getting ridiculous. They're manufacturing reasons to come after me." "Do you think they're trying to intimidate you?" Lily asked. Absolutely, Jack said. They're trying to wear me down, make me give up, but it's not going to work. Fueled by anger and determination, Jack started talking to more of his neighbors, hoping to find others who had run afoul of the HOA. What he discovered shocked him. One woman, Margaret, told him about how she had been fined hundreds of dollars for planting flowers that weren't on the HOA's approved list. A young couple down the street, Ethan and Rachel, revealed that they had nearly lost their home after being fined repeatedly for parking violations that were never properly documented. They're relentless, Rachel said. It's like they're looking for reasons to fine people. Jack began to see a pattern. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were exploiting them. The fines were a tool to exert control and, in some cases, push people out of their homes. The final straw came when Jack's security cameras captured footage of a man walking through his backyard late at night, inspecting the hot tub with a flashlight. The man didn't appear to notice the cameras, but his actions were clear he was looking for something. Jack sent the footage to Paige, who was immediately alarmed. "This is evidence of harassment," she said. "We can use this to strengthen our case." That night, as Jack reviewed the footage again, he felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about a hot tub anymore. It was about standing up to a system that thrived on intimidation and exploitation. He knew the fight was only beginning, but he was ready for it. The sun was setting as Jack stood in his backyard, staring at the hot tub that had become the centerpiece of his personal war with the HOA. The once peaceful refuge he had envisioned when he bought the house now felt more like a battleground. Every glance at the for community use-only sign sent a wave of anger through him. But that anger was no longer aimless. Jack had a plan, and with Paige's help, he was determined to see it through. A week after the security footage incident, Jack and Paige met in her office to go over their findings. The lawyer's desk was covered in papers, copies of HOA bylaws, letters they had sent Jack, and reports from other residents who had started to come forward with similar complaints. The picture they were painting was damning. "I've reviewed everything," Paige began, tapping a stack of documents. "And it's clear the HOA is stepping way out of bounds. Their bylaws don't give them the authority to install community property on private land without consent. Plus, the fines they're hitting you with, those are borderline extortionate. They're hoping you'll get overwhelmed and give up." Jack crossed his arms. "What can we do to stop them?" Paige leaned forward. "First, we need more evidence. You said some of your neighbors are dealing with similar issues, right? If we can show a pattern of abuse, it'll strengthen your case. Second, we're going to file for a formal injunction to prevent them from issuing any more fines or making further changes to your property. That'll buy us time while we dig deeper." Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll talk to the neighbors. If they've got stories, I'll get them to share." Over the next few days, Jack went door to door, speaking with anyone who would listen. Some were hesitant to get involved, afraid of retaliation from the HOA. Others opened up, venting years of frustration. Margaret, the woman fined for planting unapproved flowers, showed Jack copies of her letters from the HOA, dozens of them, each more aggressive than the last. Ethan and Rachel revealed that they had been forced to borrow money from family to pay off parking fines that had mysteriously doubled overnight. "I swear," Ethan said, shaking his head, "it's like they make up rules just to take our money. We almost had to sell the house last year because of them." Jack began compiling their stories, organizing them into a growing folder of evidence. As he worked, he started to notice a common thread, a company called Crestview Developments. Several of the foreclosed properties in the neighborhood had been purchased by Crestview, a real estate investment firm. Jack mentioned it to Paige, who began digging into public records. 2 days later, she called Jack with a discovery that made his stomach turn. "Crestview is owned by the HOA president's brother-in-law," Paige said. "It's not a coincidence. They're targeting people, slapping them with fines, and then forcing them into foreclosure. Crestview swoops in and buys the properties cheap. It's a racket. Jack's grip on his phone tightened. So, this isn't just about me. They're doing this to everyone. That's what it looks like, Paige said. And if we can prove it, the HOA is in serious trouble. That evening, Jack met with Tyler, the older neighbor who had warned him about the HOA's tactics. Tyler seemed hesitant at first, but when Jack explained what Paige had uncovered, the man's eyes narrowed. "I always knew something wasn't right," Tyler said. "They fined me for that damn mailbox, but I didn't fight back. I figured it wasn't worth the trouble. Guess I was wrong." Tyler disappeared into his house and returned a few minutes later with a small recorder. "I still have this from a couple years ago. One of the board members let it slip during a meeting that they were tightening the screws to clear out dead weight. They didn't know I was recording." Jack stared at the device. "You think there's anything on there we can use?" "Only one way to find out," Tyler said with a shrug. The next morning, Jack and Paige sat in her office, listening to the recording. Tyler's instincts had been right on the tape. An HOA board member could be heard joking about how the fines and foreclosures were good for business. The laughter in the background made Jack's stomach churn. "This is huge," Paige said, her eyes lighting up. "If we combine this with the Crestview connection and the neighbor testimonies, we've got enough to take them to court." But the HOA wasn't going to let Jack make his case without a fight. 2 days later, another letter arrived, this one more threatening than the last. The HOA claimed that Jack's continued hostility was causing division in the neighborhood and warned him that further disruptive behavior could result in legal action. "They're doubling down," Jack said, showing the letter to Lily that evening. "They know we're onto them." Lily frowned. "What do they mean by disruptive behavior? You haven't done anything." "It doesn't matter," Jack said. "They're trying to intimidate me." The intimidation escalated the next morning when Jack woke up to find a bright red notice taped to his front door. It was a formal complaint from the HOA, accusing him of tampering with the community hot tub. The complaint included a demand for $1,000 in damages, along with a warning that failure to pay could result in legal action. Jack ripped the notice down and stormed into the house, fuming. "They're making stuff up now," he yelled, tossing the paper onto the counter. Lily picked it up, her brow furrowing. "This is insane. They're just throwing everything they've got at you, hoping something will stick." "Let them," Jack said, his voice steely. "We've got more than enough to hit back." The breaking point came that night when Jack's security cameras captured a man trespassing in his backyard again, this time with a toolbox. The footage clearly showed the man loosening screws on the hot tub's control panel, a move clearly meant to stage further damages. Jack immediately sent the footage to Paige, who was livid. "This crosses the line," she said. "We're not just dealing with fines and intimidation anymore. This is outright sabotage. I'm filing for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow morning." As the days passed, Jack's case gained momentum. Neighbors who had been hesitant to speak out started coming forward, emboldened by the growing pile of evidence. Tyler shared his story with a local journalist, who published an article exposing the HOA's shady practices. The article went viral, and suddenly, the fight wasn't just about Jack, it was about an entire community standing up to an organization that had gone unchecked for too long. The HOA responded by doubling down on their legal threats, but Jack and Paige were ready. With the recording, the security footage, and a stack of testimony from neighbors, they filed a formal lawsuit against the HOA, accusing them of abuse of power, harassment, and fraud. As Jack stood in his backyard one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a renewed sense of determination. This wasn't just about a hot tub or fines anymore. It was about justice for himself, for his neighbors, and for everyone who had been steamrolled by a system that put profit over people. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Jack felt like the tide was turning in his favor. The courtroom was buzzing with tension as Jack entered, flanked by Paige. The filing for an injunction against the HOA had forced them into a preliminary hearing, and the HOA board had wasted no time escalating the conflict further. Sitting at the far end of the room, HOA President Thomas Hill glared at Jack with thinly veiled contempt, flanked by a pair of expensive-looking lawyers. Jack straightened his shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. Paige had warned him that this would be the moment the HOA tried to discredit him completely. And she was right. The moment the hearing began, the HOA's lawyers launched into a scathing argument, accusing Jack of being a disruptive element in the neighborhood. They cited his supposed misuse of the hot tub, his deliberate vandalism, and his hostile interactions with HOA board members. Jack gritted his teeth as the accusations piled up, each one more absurd than the last. The HOA painted him as a rogue homeowner trying to destabilize the neighborhood, a picture so far removed from the truth it made his blood boil. But Paige was ready. When it was her turn to speak, she calmly dismantled every claim, presenting clear evidence that the fines and accusations were baseless. Then she dropped the bombshell. "Your Honor," Paige said, her voice steady and confident, "we have evidence that the HOA has been systematically targeting homeowners with minor violations in order to push them into foreclosure. This isn't just a case of overzealous rule enforcement. It's a deliberate scheme to profit from vulnerable residents." She presented the recording Tyler had provided, the security footage of the sabotage attempt, and the connections between the HOA president and Crestview Developments. The room grew quiet as the judge reviewed the evidence. Thomas Hill's smug expression faltered, and Jack felt a flicker of hope. The judge granted the injunction, freezing all fines and penalties against Jack until the case could be fully reviewed. It was a small victory, but it was enough to rattle the HOA. As Jack left the courtroom, he caught a glimpse of Thomas storming out, barking orders at his lawyers. But the fight was far from over. The next day, Jack received another letter from the HOA, this one accusing him of inciting unrest among his neighbors. It was clear the board was trying to regain control by turning the community against him. To Jack's frustration, the strategy seemed to be working. At the next HOA meeting, Jack decided to confront the board directly. The room was packed, and the atmosphere was tense. As Jack entered, he noticed several neighbors avoiding his gaze. Others whispered behind their hands, their expressions wary. When it was his turn to speak, Jack stood at the front of the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I just want to live in my house without being harassed. The HOA overstepped when they put that hot tub in my backyard without asking me. And now they're trying to cover their tracks by throwing baseless accusations at me." A murmur ran through the crowd, but Thomas Hill cut him off. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone icy, "you've done nothing but disrupt this community since the day you moved in. You've refused to cooperate, ignored the rules, and now you're spreading lies to make yourself look like the victim." "I'm not spreading lies," Jack shot back. "I have evidence, and if anyone here cares to see it, I'm happy to share it. The HOA has been targeting people like me for years, pushing them out of their homes so they can profit." The room erupted into whispers, but before anyone could respond, Thomas banged his gavel. "This meeting is adjourned," he barked, standing abruptly. "We'll not tolerate this kind of behavior." Jack left the meeting feeling both frustrated and vindicated. He knew he had struck a nerve, but the division in the neighborhood was growing. Some residents began to rally around him, sharing their own experiences with the HOA's overreach. Others, however, sided with Thomas, afraid of rocking the boat or losing favor with the board. The pressure on Jack continued to mount. His mailbox was vandalized, His tires slashed and his security cameras caught a shadowy figure prowling around his yard late at night. Paige urged him to stay calm and focus on the case, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. One night, as Jack and Lily were reviewing documents in the kitchen, there was a loud knock at the door. Jack opened it to find Tyler standing there, looking shaken. "You're not going to believe this," Tyler said, handing Jack a folder. Inside were pages of internal emails from the HOA board, leaked by an anonymous whistleblower. The emails detailed the board's plans to target specific homeowners, including Jack, using manufactured violations to justify fines and foreclosures. Jack's stomach churned as he read the emails. One message from Thomas Hill stood out: "Carter is becoming a problem. We need to shut him down before he stirs up more trouble." "This is it," Jack said, his voice low and resolute. "This is the proof we need." With the emails in hand, Paige filed an additional complaint against the HOA, accusing them of harassment and fraud. The case gained media attention, and soon reporters were knocking on Jack's door. He reluctantly agreed to an interview, hoping to shine a light on the HOA's corruption. The story spread quickly, and public opinion began to shift. Neighbors who had stayed silent started speaking out, emboldened by Jack's determination. But the HOA didn't back down. Thomas Hill released a statement denying all accusations and accusing Jack of orchestrating a smear campaign. Tensions reached a boiling point when Jack returned home one evening to find his backyard gate wide open. He rushed outside and saw the hot tub had been vandalized, its panels ripped off, wires exposed, and water draining onto the grass. Jack's security cameras had captured everything, including a man in an HOA maintenance uniform tampering with the tub. Paige wasted no time adding the footage to their growing pile of evidence. "This isn't just harassment," she said. "This is criminal." As Jack sat in his living room that night, surrounded by files, photos, and videos, he felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. The HOA had thrown everything they had at him, but he wasn't backing down. He had come too far to quit now. The battle was no longer just about his backyard, it was about standing up to a system that had bullied and exploited too many people for too long. And Jack was ready to see it through to the end. The courtroom was packed with spectators, the air thick with anticipation as the judge called the session to order. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, while Paige arranged their documents into a meticulous stack. Across the aisle, Thomas Hill sat rigidly with his team of lawyers, his face a mask of calm confidence, though Jack could see the tension in his clenched jaw. This was at the culmination of months of stress, harassment, and digging for the truth. Everything was on the line. Paige began her opening statement with precision and clarity. She painted a vivid picture of how the HOA had overstepped its authority, installing the hot tub on Jack's private property without his consent and subsequently harassing him with baseless fines and manufactured accusations. But she didn't stop there. She laid out the larger scheme, the HOA's pattern of targeting vulnerable homeowners, issuing excessive fines, and using those fines to force foreclosures, all to benefit Crestview Developments, a company closely tied to Thomas Hill. "This case is not just about one man being harassed," Paige said, her voice firm and clear. "It's about a system of abuse and exploitation that has gone unchecked for too long. Mr. Carter's fight is not only for his property but for every homeowner in this community who has been bullied into silence." The judge nodded thoughtfully, motioning for the HOA's lead attorney to respond. The man rose, exuding practiced confidence. He dismissed Paige's arguments as sensationalist rhetoric, claiming that all of the HOA's actions were within their legal rights. He portrayed Jack as an unruly homeowner unwilling to follow community rules, painting the hot tub as a benefit to the neighborhood that Jack had selfishly sabotaged. Jack clenched his fists under the table, but Paige placed a calming hand on his arm. "Stick to the plan," she whispered. The evidence presentation was methodical and damning. Paige introduced the security footage, showing the man tampering with the hot tub, the leaked emails revealing the HOA's coordinated efforts to target Jack, and the financial records tying Crestview developments to Thomas Hill's family. Each piece of evidence added another crack to the HOA's defense. But it was the testimonies that truly shifted the tide. Tyler took the stand first, recounting his own experience with the HOA and explaining how he had secretly recorded a board meeting where fines were discussed as a tool to clean up the neighborhood. His voice wavered slightly as he played the recording for the court, but the impact was undeniable. Margaret followed, sharing her story of being fined into near financial ruin over flowers she planted in her yard. Her testimony was raw and heartfelt, highlighting the fear and helplessness many homeowners felt when faced with the HOA's relentless tactics. Finally, Jack took the stand. He recounted the months of harassment, the sleepless nights, and the constant feeling of being watched. He described how the HOA's actions had turned his dream of homeownership into a nightmare. "I moved into this neighborhood to build a life," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I worked hard for my home, and I've done nothing but try to protect it. The HOA has violated my rights, intimidated me, and tried to paint me as the villain because I refused to back down. But I'm not the only one they've done this to. I'm just the one who decided to fight." As Jack stepped down, he noticed several neighbors in the gallery nodding, their expressions a mix of solidarity and shame. They had been silent for too long, and Jack's courage had forced them to confront the reality of their own experiences. When it came time for Thomas Hill to testify, his carefully composed demeanor began to crack. Paige's cross-examination was relentless, pinning him down on every inconsistency and exposing his ties to Crestview developments. When asked directly about the emails instructing the board to target Jack, Thomas stammered, his evasive answers doing more harm than good. The turning point came when Paige introduced a surprise witness, a former HOA employee who had come forward after the story gained media attention. The whistleblower revealed how board members had manipulated records and pressured staff to enforce bogus violations. By the end of the testimony, the judge's expression had shifted from neutral to stern. He called for a brief recess before delivering his ruling, leaving the courtroom buzzing with speculation. Jack sat in the hallway with Paige and Lily, his heart pounding. He had done everything he could, but now the outcome was out of his hands. Lily squeezed his shoulder. "No matter what happens, you did the right thing," she said softly. When the judge returned, the room fell silent. In a measured tone, he delivered his verdict. The HOA was found guilty of harassment, abuse of power, and fraud. The fines against Jack were declared null and void, and the HOA was ordered to pay damages to him and other affected homeowners. Furthermore, an independent audit of the HOA's practices was mandated, and Thomas Hill was referred for criminal investigation. As the ruling was read, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. The weight that had been pressing down on him for months finally began to lift. He glanced at Thomas, whose face had gone pale, and then at Paige, who gave him a small, triumphant smile. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Jack, but he kept his remarks brief. "This isn't just my victory," he said. "It's a victory for everyone who's been bullied by people in power. No one should have to fight this hard just to protect what's theirs." As Jack walked away, Lily by his side, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. The fight had been grueling, but it was worth it. His home was his again, and the HOA's stranglehold on the neighborhood had been broken. For the first time in months, Jack felt truly at peace. The morning air was crisp and cool as Jack stepped onto his back porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. For the first time in months, The sight of his backyard didn't fill him with anger or frustration. The hot tub was gone, hauled away the day after the court's ruling, leaving behind a patch of dirt that Jack planned to turn into a fire pit. The for community use only sign had been ripped out and discarded, and the backyard finally felt like it belonged to him again. Lily joined him a moment later, her hair tousled from sleep and a blanket draped over her shoulders. "It's quiet," she said, taking a seat on the porch steps. "Almost weird, isn't it?" Jack chuckled. "Yeah, but it's a good kind of weird." The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of changes. After the judge's ruling, the HOA's board was forced into complete disarray. Thomas Hill had resigned in disgrace, and the independent audit uncovered years of financial mismanagement and unethical practices. Several other board members were implicated in the scheme to profit from foreclosures, and Crestview Developments faced its own investigation. For the residents of the neighborhood, the fallout was both a reckoning and a relief. Many who had stayed silent during the conflict began to come forward, sharing their own stories of mistreatment and rallying around Jack. What started as his personal battle had grown into a movement for change, and the community was finally united against the oppressive rule of the HOA. Jack had become somewhat of a local hero, though he wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention. Neighbors stopped by to thank him, bringing casseroles and baked goods as tokens of appreciation. Tyler dropped off a six-pack of beer and joked that he owed Jack more than that for sticking his neck out. Even Margaret, who had once seemed wary of Jack's fight, embraced him warmly and offered to help with his backyard renovations. Despite the goodwill, Jack remained cautious. He knew the fight wasn't entirely over. There were still meetings to attend and new policies to draft to ensure the HOA couldn't abuse its power again. But for now, he allowed himself to savor the victory. One afternoon, as Jack was working in the yard, a group of kids from the neighborhood stopped by to watch him dig the foundation for his fire pit. One of them, a boy no older than 10, looked up at Jack with wide eyes. "Are you the guy who fought the HOA?" the boy asked. Jack laughed, setting down his shovel. "I guess I am. Why do you ask?" The boy grinned. "My mom says you're like a superhero. She says you saved our neighborhood." Jack shook his head with a smile. "I'm no superhero, kid. Just someone who didn't back down." As the kids ran off, Lily appeared at the back door, holding a tray of lemonade. "You're a neighborhood legend now," she teased, handing him a glass. Yeah, Jack said with a smirk. "I'll add it to my resume." That evening, Jack hosted a small gathering in his backyard to celebrate the end of the ordeal. The fire pit wasn't finished yet, but he'd set up a grill and strung up lights along the fence. Neighbors mingled, laughing and sharing stories, and for the first time, the tension that had hung over the community seemed to lift. Lily sat next to Jack as the stars came out, the two of them watching the fire crackle in a portable pit he had borrowed. "So," she said, nudging him, "what's next? Think you'll run for HOA president?" Jack snorted. "Not a chance. I've had enough of HOA politics to last me a lifetime." Lily grinned. "Well, whatever you do, I think Mom and Dad would be proud." Jack's smile softened. He looked around the yard, at the house he had fought so hard to protect, and felt a deep sense of peace. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think they would be." As the night wound down and the last of the guests left, Jack stood alone in the backyard, the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. The fight with the HOA had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, but it had also shown him the power of resilience and community. This was his home, and he had earned the right to call it his sanctuary. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, and Jack let out a long breath, finally feeling the weight of the past few months lift completely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he was at peace.